Hello and welcome to another episode of Stories from the Shed. My name is Adam, and again with us this week, a man who's been playing gas chamber and electric chair all week. Jake, how you doing?
I've moved on from those games. I'm all done. Rolling myself up in the carpet was just too much.
Oh, Jake's kempered out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm done. After recording it twice, it's enough.
Yeah, and we have another one of our friends back with us. Jason, what's up, man?
How you doing tonight, Adam?
Doing all right. Thank you for coming. Thank you for freezing with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
a little warmer than last time.
Right? It was warmer than the other night.
Yeah. Well, our story's a little bit warmer than the other one, too, in a sense, too.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So, how was your week, Jake?
It was good. It was nice. It was kind of quiet. We were down a guy in our department, but you know what? It was we handled it well for just the three of us. It went really good.
Mine was fucking fantastic. How was yours, bud?
Yours wasn't as good as mine because I've been on vacation this week.
Oh,
it's been
jealous.
great.
He's been ready to come to the shed.
3 more days.
The shed's like a vacation, isn't it? A little bit for an hour.
Anything's a vacation from not going to that place.
Well, tonight we are drinking Blue Moon, a Belgian wheat ale. What do you think?
It's better once I put the orange in it.
Better with the orange.
Yeah, it doesn't taste so much like Bud Light.
Let's see here. I'll take a swig here. I'll kind of... it's a 3. I'm going to give you 3 Scully fingers on that one.
Yeah, I don't think I can go much higher than that either.
Yeah.
To be honest.
It's good, but not great.
And the orange brings it there.
Yeah, well, it's like an orange drink at that point.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, what's our story for the week?
Sodder Children.
The Sodder Children. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. It was brought to us by Jason. It's something that he had read about, a few years ago or so?
Yeah, just scrolling through true crime stuff, and one of those things I found on like an unsolved type website. A little bit of a conspiracy to it, but it seems to be a pretty basic story, honestly.
Yeah, I think now that it's this took place on Christmas Eve of 1945. So now in modern times, we were just saying before we hit the record button here that if this would happen today, this kind of an event, it would be an open, shut book, probably.
Yeah, things would have been a lot different. The response time, everything. There's a lot of things that would have been a lot different.
But nonetheless, it still kind of is a fairly interesting story, just because there's a lot of speculation behind it. There's a lot of avenues you can kind of go down. I think really for us, we kind of ended up converging back onto the same path, but I can certainly see where other people might, speculate otherwise.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for conjecture for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what do you feel? How do you feel about that, Jake?
What do you mean?
This story here, I mean, there's a lot of speculation, but it's probably due to the fact that it was in 1945, whereas...
Well, not only that, but the event itself only took place over the course of an hour, something like that. So there's not a lot of, I guess, info surrounding the actual event. It's more speculation than anything else.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot of like the aftermath of it. Is a large part of the story for sure.
Right.
Yeah, this story is actually, it's about a family that on Christmas Eve their house burned down, and all the events that kind of follow after that. So what we'll do, I guess we'll start by...
Of all nights for your house to burn down, Christmas Eve.
Yeah, that's probably
Christmas
the worst.
Day, Christmas morning.
Yeah, and I think that kind of might have played a role in how difficult it was getting the assistance that they needed.
Yeah.
But I guess where this story begins would go with the Sodder parents. Now, George Sodder, he was born Giorgio Sodder, and he was from Italy. Him and his brother had moved to the United States when he was 13 years old. As soon as they had hit Ellis Island.
Older brother, younger brother?
I got that here.
I think it was an older brother.
I believe it was his older brother. But as soon as they got to Ellis Island, his brother beat feet, went back to Italy, and kind of left George here on his own.
Oh, thanks.
But,
Great.
like a lot of immigrants, people, that were moving into the United States at the time, he had taken more of an American-sounding name and switched it to George Sodder. And from there, I guess you could say he kind of took that typical 1945 immigrant path of being a hard worker, working, small jobs in the beginning, but eventually working himself up into working for the railroads in Pennsylvania, where he was carrying water and other supplies for workers, probably working at mining or so. Jason, would you?
Yeah, after a few years as a truck driver, he started his own trucking company, basically hauling dirt to fill construction sites. Ended up hauling coal for a lot of the mines in the region, West Virginia. That's pretty much their main export in that time period was the mines.
Sure, and I think it's still big today.
It definitely is still big. Yep.
So then at some point he had met his wife, and she was a storekeeper.
She's a storekeeper's daughter.
Storekeeper's daughter, okay, and her name was Jennie, and she also had immigrated from Italy, but younger. I believe she was around 3 years old when her and her family had crossed over and came here.
Yeah, basically the impression I get is this area of West Virginia was kind of like a settling ground for the immigrants from Italy. You know, they're trying to keep them together to kind of keep their culture and whatnot.
It absolutely was. I'd done some research on that. In that area, there was a huge settlement of Italians. So,
okay.
And they worked it. That was their area, and
That was like outside of Fayetteville, right?
that's right. And I believe they settled in that area. They moved into a 2-story timber frame house 2 miles north of town of the Fayetteville area.
Yep.
In 1923, they had their first child.
First of 10.
Their first of 10 children.
Oh my
That's
God,
right.
10
We get that's a big
kids.
part of the
Holy
story. It's
shit.
all the children in this. Now George's business, it prospered. As Jason was saying here, the coal industry was exploding, and with that, I'm sure that kind of created more work for him.
Right.
And what they had ended up eventually doing is they purchased their own home.
Right, and they were one of the most respected middle class families in the area due to his business. Having 10 children, obviously you're going to have your name out in the community. But basically, all the local officials and the townspeople had pretty strong opinions about the Sodder family being very respected. And George had many of his own, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of his own opinions on things.
Opinions.
Yeah, he had strong opinions on basically Italy, where he came from.
Specifically, Benito Mussolini.
Right. And like we discussed, there was a very large Italian community in that area. So with him being very opinionated.
For those people that don't know who Mussolini is, Jay, could you tell us?
Mussolini was basically Hitler for Italy. He basically ran alongside Hitler during World War II. That's really all you need to know. Let's put it this way: when he was captured and shot, he was hung in the town square where he was killed, and the town stoned him, beat the shit out of him, kicked him, like everything you could imagine. When they took his body down from where he was hanging, he was unrecognizable.
Right, and basically, he was basically just carrying out Hitler's wishes in Italy.
Essentially, so we could see where there would be a lot of people like George that might not sympathize with somebody like Mussolini and might speak out about him.
Right.
But we could also see where people would support their nationality.
Right.
You know, we support our leader. There was a time in this world where people, regardless, supported their leader. And this was definitely a time for that.
Absolutely.
So with that, you can also see where you would even find the back and forth here in America in regards to something that's happening overseas.
Right.
So the last of the Sodder children, Sylvia, was born in 1943. By then, there was their second oldest son, Joe, had left home to serve in the military during World War II. The following year, Mussolini, as we said, was executed and such. And then again in October of 1945, to go back to after all this, he was killed in August. And after this, in 1945, in October, this is when a salesman went to his house, and he was a life insurance salesman.
Yeah, he was a life insurance salesman trying to get George to buy life insurance. And basically, when Mussolini was executed, some of the things that George Sodder had said about him over time kind of left some hard feelings in the community. So this life insurance salesman basically went to him, telling him, "You should probably get some life insurance because there's a lot of people in town that aren't exactly thrilled with you right now."
That's a crazy thing to say to somebody.
It definitely is. It's
you
not
sh-
even the craziest it gets.
You should get some insurance because people fucking hate you.
Pretty much.
And not only that, but the insurance salesman said your house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. So it's not even saying that you're not well liked. It's saying that something legitimate is going to happen to you and your kids.
Right.
So prepare for
protected
that.
now.
All because he said no to the life insurance policy.
No,
I know,
also,
what a horrible thing to do, just to say no to life insurance.
it is.
It's
Well,
not a good sales pitch.
Well, and again, if this guy didn't particularly care for him, I could see where he would be like, you know what, I need the sale, but
I'm not going to lie, that's how I feel at the Apple store. Trying to buy a MacBook. Take this MacBook or die.
Yeah, the insurance salesman basically told him that the reason why he said that is because of all the dirty remarks he's been making about Mussolini. So basically, he's insinuating that somebody in the town is trying to do them harm due to his opinions on Mussolini.
now also in 1945, the Sodders, like a lot of other people that were well-to-do, were replacing their stoves with an electric stove.
Yeah.
This was a big thing back then. And when he did this, to kind of give you the idea of how well off he was, he even had his wiring redone by an independent company, and then had the local electric company, which is would be government regulated, I would assume.
Right.
would
Basically,
assume
it started because there was actually a visitor to their house, and he went out back and took a peek at the fuse box for whatever reason. I don't know if that was common, and he actually told George that it would cause a fire someday. So obviously that kind of caught George off guard after that insurance salesman had said what he said. So that's when he called the electric company and had them come rewire everything for the stove and whatnot. And they actually said it was safe when they left.
So you had two different companies kind of deem this wiring's good. You know, he replaced the stove. There was these few comments. He felt that there was a need to update things. And so this was some kind of thing that was on his mind.
Right. And I feel like electrical fires were a lot more common back then to begin with.
Oh, they had to be. They had to be, absolutely. So George did what he had to do to keep the family safe, and he did this. And then this takes us, we'll say, to the night of the event.
Yeah,
Christmas
Eve. Yep.
Christmas Eve, 1945. This was like a lot of people's Christmas Eve, even today.
Yep.
The Sodder celebrated Christmas Eve. The oldest daughter had been working at a dime store, which I think is kind of like a dollar store these days.
Right.
Is it a dollar store?
Inflation.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, take a look. It's probably the same. It's definitely the same idea. And this was in the downtown part of that city. She was surprised by her three younger sisters, Martha, Jennie, and Betty.
Yes.
She surprised them with new toys.
Right.
And probably electric toys.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just saying, you know what I mean? At that time, they were starting to come out with stuff like that.
Wood burning kits.
Yeah, a dime store is a store selling cheap merchandise, like a Dollar Tree, a Family Dollar, or something like that.
Yeah, it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah.
Typical job for a young kid. The younger of the children was so excited that she had asked her mother, "Could we stay up a little bit later tonight?"
Pretty common on Christmas Eve.
Pretty common. You know, give the kids a gift that day, that night. Let them stay up a little bit later. It's Christmas Eve.
No, you have to go to bed. Santa's not going to come unless you're sleeping.
Pray to God your kid sleeps later than 4 a.m.
Yeah, right. You know, this is just a pretty common night for anybody.
Right.
Now, around 10 p.m. that night, now here's where things get confusing because the Sodders do have a 5-year-old daughter named Jennie. They also have the mother's name is Jennie, too.
Right. And there's also a George Jr., too.
Yeah, so this kind of gets, so kind of bear with us here, but so at 10 p.m., Jennie told them that they could stay up a little later.
That was the mother.
That's being the mother, as long as the two oldest boys were still awake, a 14-year-old Maurice and his 9-year-old brother Louis. They remembered to put the cows and the chickens away and kind of take care of all the farming type.
Right, they ran a farm.
That sounds like going to my mom's house.
Yeah, you know, it's just, you can almost paint the picture in your mind. The husband and the two oldest boys, John, who was 23, it must be back from the war at the time.
Yeah, the war's over.
War's over. Yeah, so
he's
he's
the oldest. The second child was the one who was at the war.
Okay. And George Jr., 16, they spent the day working with their father. They were already asleep. You know, they were probably out doing all kinds of crazy shit.
Yeah, they had been doing the farm most of the day, so obviously exhausting work and probably have to be at it pretty early the next morning, too.
I would imagine, even with it being Christmas Day. Right. Now, so they were asleep. The remaining of the children, they did their chores, and the mother took Sylvia, the youngest, she was 2 years old, upstairs with her, and they went to bed.
Right.
Now, by upstairs, I don't think this is the top floor. I believe there's an attic, and then but we'll kind of get more into the layout. Now, a little bit of time passes. We're going to bring it to 12:30 in the morning. Jennie, the mother, is woken, and she went downstairs to answer her phone.
Yeah, she heard the phone at 12:30, and she went downstairs to answer. That's what woke her up.
And I don't know exactly what it was. There was a woman that called. There was some kind of...
Yeah, it was a woman. She didn't recognize the voice. The woman was asking for a name that she wasn't familiar with. And there was a sound of laughter and clanking glasses in the background. Pretty common for Christmas Eve. I mean, you know, late night with the adults after the children go to bed, maybe having a couple drinks, something like that.
A glass of wine or two.
Mm-hmm.
Totally normal kind of thing, Jake, huh?
Yeah, totally.
So they don't think nothing of it?
No. She told the caller she reached the wrong number, but she did kind of note that the caller had a little bit of a weird laugh.
She's probably drunk.
Probably drunk, right?
Yep. And she ended up hanging up the phone and she went back to bed.
Yeah, and then I believe she's a little short while after, about half an hour later, Jennie's again woken, but this time it's something different.
Right.
This time she hears an object hitting the roof. Now I believe it's a tin roof, and then she can hear it rolling down with a loud bang.
Right, and one thing that she noted too is as well when she went down to answer the phone, she noticed that the blinds are still open and the lights are still on, which when the children went to bed, that's normally something they would have taken care of. So that's when she went back to bed, and she ended up hearing a noise hitting the roof around 1 a.m. So she kind of took care of the curtains and whatnot. Probably thought, lazy kids, but whatever, late night. So
Christmas Eve, time to go to bed.
But something hitting the roof, I mean, that I would think that would get your attention. I mean, especially at 1 a.m.
It's just kind of an odd thing. It's not something that you would normally hear.
Right.
But even still, she's probably half asleep at this point.
Yeah, she said she heard something hit the roof and basically like a rolling noise. So.
And if she's like the three of us, she's probably had a couple of drinks and just wants to get to bed and she's ready to do Christmas with her kids. You
may not even have thought it was on the roof. I mean, if something ever fell in your kid's room that you were like, what the hell is that noise? But it's something, they had a toy in their bed they weren't supposed to have or something.
Right. So. Now, again, a short while later after that would put us to about 1:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. She's woken up again, but at this time it's by the smell of smoke.
Yep.
And then I believe what she does is she gets up again and she goes down to George's office, which is run out of this place too. I mean, they're doing all kinds of stuff out of this house. And from there, the telephone lines and the fuse box.
She found that his office was on fire and that
it looked like it was coming from that area, right?
Right, and obviously with the guy who brought up the fuse box before, you would think that would raise questions, but he had that fixed, so that really shouldn't have been a concern.
But still, I bring the point to it being the fuse box because it does seem like a typical place where a fire would just happen, even with new equipment. I mean, things do happen.
Well, yeah, it's possible something wasn't hooked up right.
Right, exactly, and was just waiting to go wrong.
Right. I mean, you ever had anything done in your car where the guy fixed it, and a week later you're like, did he really fix it?
Because it seems fucked up.
It's like chasing a fucking oil leak.
Right. Yeah. So then what she ends up doing, she wakes up her husband and the oldest of the sons that was there at the time.
Right.
23-year-old. Yes.
Yep.
John. And then from there,
both parents and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, and then John and George Jr., the 2 older ones, they left the house. They tried yelling to the children upstairs, the rest of the children. I believe there was 5 of them upstairs.
Yes.
The oldest one was, the second oldest was off at war. So the 5 youngest children were upstairs, and they were yelling to them, but they heard no response. But the thing is that they couldn't go up the stairs itself because it was already on fire.
Yeah. Could you imagine being at the base of the stairs kind of looking up, and you got your brothers and sisters up there, and you're just like shouting to them, and they're not coming, but you know that everything around you is burning, and it's time for you to get out of the house.
Right. And the thing is, John actually had said in his first police interview that he went up to the attic to alert his siblings that were sleeping, but he actually changed that story later and said that he only called up there. So that kind of plays into the story too. I mean, those 5 children upstairs, basically you would think perished in the fire if they couldn't get to them.
Well, it's sad, but it does happen, and that's most likely something that you would imagine.
Right.
And Adam, I thought this was supposed to be a lighter story.
Well, this is where the story begins.
I mean, this is better than serial killers. That's for damn sure.
Well, yeah, we're just painting that. Gotta paint the full picture because there's so much that happens, as we said, leading up to this fire.
Right. And, it's not like they were just standing at the bottom of the stairs yelling and they went, oh, damn, couldn't get him. And they just kind of left. I mean, their efforts were
I don't think anyone does that.
No, their efforts were just beginning at that point.
Right.
They were trying to rescue the children, which actually was a little more complicated than they expected. Obviously, the phone didn't work for some reason. I wasn't sure why at that time. So Marion actually ran to the neighbor's house to call the fire department. There's also a driver on the nearby road. We looked up a map, but we couldn't find it. But the impression we get is this is very close to one of the state routes in West Virginia, so pretty busy road.
Yeah.
But there's a caller who, there's a person who was driving along that road and saw the fire, and they went to a nearby tavern, but they were unsuccessful in calling as well because the phone of the tavern actually turned out to be broken.
Wow, imagine that.
Really?
Huh?
Right down the street, too.
Yep.
Huh. It makes me wonder if their phone line was cut or if it was just an outage in that whole area.
That's a thought, too, that maybe it was just certain areas that were out and others. I mean, I don't know how that works really myself.
Well, I've seen it happen. I know this isn't a phone thing, but this just with power. On my road, my side of the road is on a different power grid than the other side of the road. So I'll lose power, but the people across the street from me will have lights.
Yeah,
Makes
I've seen
sense.
that happen. And the other thing that would kind of lead credence to that as well is the neighbor or the motorist was actually eventually successful in reaching the fire department, but they were in a different area of town on another phone when it happened.
And not only that, but the fire department was short-staffed at that point because a lot of their members were still out at war or out doing other things. A lot of these guys have multiple positions protecting the community, whether it be in the military or being police, firefighters, EMTs, whatever.
The funny thing is, along with being short-staffed, the chief firefighter couldn't operate the fire truck.
The fire truck. So that was a huge delay.
Wow.
And I think they did like a phone, like a calling tree. Like I call you, Jake, you call Jason, and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So just...
Were we at the point where we didn't have direct phone numbers? You actually had to call the operator still?
Send them an email.
Right. Well, I'm not sure.
I'll send them a text message.
I'm not sure if this was common back then or not, but basically the impression I get of it is like, small town Maine, we don't actually have a fire department. We have a volunteer fire department.
Right.
That's kind of the impression that I get.
Certainly. That's how I felt too.
Yeah.
And while all of this is going on, the George Sodder and his oldest son that was with him, and I believe others, they were making other attempts to try to help. He climbed up, I believe, 13 feet to the second floor.
No, he was barefoot and he climbed the wall. And he broke open the attic window where the children were. He actually cut his arm pretty bad in the process.
Why was he climbing up the wall?
Trying to get to the attic window.
But wouldn't he use a ladder?
Good question.
Yes, good question. Yep. They intended to use the ladder to the attic that they would normally have. Obviously would have made it much easier to rescue them than
I would hope so.
Throwing them off the roof or whatever.
He ain't no fucking Spider-Man.
But the ladder that was normally in its normal resting spot, kind of next to the garage or next to the house where most people would keep their ladder, for some reason wasn't there.
Oh.
And there was also a water barrel that they were going to try to use to extinguish the fire, and that was frozen solid.
Well, that just makes sense. It is Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I guess it does get that cold in West Virginia, too.
Yeah, especially at nighttime.
Jake, you found the ladder, though. Where was it?
Yeah, well, I didn't find it personally. I wasn't around in 1945, but the ladder was actually found later on after the fire about 75 feet down a cliff. Or it was 75 feet away or 100 feet away from the house, whatever it was.
Yeah,
it was thrown over a cliff anyway,
almost,
for some odd reason.
Yeah.
And George also had a couple trucks. When he couldn't find the ladder, he had a couple of his business trucks. He actually planned on pulling them up next to the house near the attic window. Ironically, neither one of the trucks could get started.
But it's safe to assume that he would have probably flooded them, maybe in his rage.
There was no electronic fuel injection at that point.
Well, that's what you would think, that he probably flooded them, but there's other questions to that as well. But that's the conclusion we all came to, I think.
Now, this house, though some escaped, some were probably still in it. They say that it collapsed over the next 45 minutes, so it didn't take long.
Right. And the fire chief never made it there at that time. He didn't make it there for over a couple hours after.
Now, my little speculation in this, and we can say this because this was so long ago, was it that he couldn't operate the truck, or was he too drunk on Christmas Eve to attempt to operate that thing? Because he is the fire chief.
Sounds logical.
I mean, it is Christmas
even in
Eve.
1945, they knew don't drink and drive.
Yeah.
They didn't necessarily follow it, though.
Well, not necessarily. Everybody follows it in 2019 either, let's be honest.
Now, after everything kind of settled around 10 a.m.
Don't drink and drive.
Yeah, for sure.
Just had to put that disclaimer out there.
That was when they started to search. The Sodders had not found any bones.
Right.
They didn't find anything, really. And I actually researched, as sick as this is, burning children, burning bodies. Good chance that the intestines would have been there because they hold a lot of fluid and they're so dense.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is obviously with the house collapsing in 45 minutes, no fire department there, the logical conclusion would be that the children perished in the fire.
Right. And safe to assume, I mean, their bones are not as dense as an adult's bones, so but they didn't find anything immediately. And this kind of created a lot of questions, I guess, for the Sodders and for a lot of other people in the community.
Right. The chief, F.J. Morris, actually said the next day that the already slow response was hampered due to his inability to drive the fire truck, not being able to reach other firemen, and he actually had to wait until somebody was available to drive the truck over. So, like you said, with the kind of I call you, you call him, he calls him, that's going to slow things down drastically.
For sure. And so, though the house collapsed in 45 minutes, it's safe to assume that the smoldering of this and the burning of this material must have gone on for several hours.
From what I understand and what my research said was about 8 hours it was smoldering. The whole house collapsed into the basement. It smoldered for about 8 hours after the collapse.
And things could have gotten very hot in there.
I would think so, yeah.
Before we get on to the aftermath and kind of some of the following events with this, why don't we take a quick break here?
We can do that.
Yeah, we'll be right back.
And we're back. Thanks for helping me out on this intro.
Oh, I thought you were going to run with this.
This lead in.
Well, we're back, and we're going to talk about the Sodders. We're Sodder certified. We're ready to go. Ready to continue with this one.
I gotta leave that long pause in there.
So the firefighters were there. They eventually all they showed up. One of which was Jennie's brother. No, again, Jennie being Mrs. Sodder.
Jennie,
yeah.
not Jennie.
They could do a little, like a lot of times when the firefighters, somebody gets there too late, the place is engulfed, and they're just kind of watching it go down. And
Yeah, there's not much you can do when the whole house is on fire and it looks like it's going to collapse. You're not going to run in.
no, it was already done by the time they got there, I believe. It was already down to the ground, Jason?
Oh, it was collapsed into the basement at
Yeah.
that point, yeah.
Oh, no shit.
And
Okay.
the firefighters got there like 2 hours after the fire started, so...
And it burned in about 45, it collapsed in about 45
Right,
minutes.
so you would say probably the firefighters got there between 3 and 4 in the morning, probably.
Right,
So,
right.
Oh, God.
So they pretty much just sat around watching, weird, but by 10 a.m., so 8 hours, 9 hours after the fire had started,
Yeah.
they basically told the Sodders that they hadn't found any bones. They kind of did a quick sift of the ashes, I guess. Didn't find any bones as you would have expected if those 5 children had burned in it. But according to another account, they actually did find bone fragments and internal organs, but they chose not to tell the family, which doesn't make sense to me. Why wouldn't you tell the family?
Why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Now hold on to that note because later on in the story that's going to become important.
Something about the organs.
Something about the organs and the bone fragments.
Right.
That's
because
true.
they're later going to they're later going to do more investigation into the house.
Right. And the people who've modern times who have kind of looked back on the story basically have said that the fire department could not have done a very good job at that search of the ruins. It probably just quick glance like, oh, it's Christmas Day, nothing here.
That's kind of what I think. They're just
Yeah.
like, they want to get back to their families. They're like, well, you know what? The fire's out. People are, whatever happened, and now time to go back to my family. So maybe if it would have happened at a different time of year,
Yeah.
maybe there would have been a different response to this.
Right.
But I think there was a lot of factors leading into this place going down. Now, the following day, a local coroner just ruled it as faulty wiring.
Yeah, and the fire chief, even though they didn't find any bones, basically came to the conclusion that the 5 unaccounted children that had passed away in the fire. Like we said, that makes sense, but without the evidence, I don't know how a fire chief can really make that call. I mean, that fire, he says it was probably hot enough to burn their bodies. I mean, I don't know what a typical house fire burns at, but Adam did research on crematoriums and whatnot. So, is it normal for bones to...
Well, the thing is that I believe they, a crematorium, they operate at around 2,000 degrees, and a house fire is going to be nowhere near that, and nowhere nearly as controlled.
Right, and Jake said something about the bones in a crematorium.
Yeah, when you get cremated, they put your body in an oven and it cooks for 2 hours and it burns all your flesh, your organs, all that stuff, but the bones actually stay somewhat together and they actually have to be ground up.
Right.
And I'd be curious to see what an electrical fire would burn at. Not only that, but I had thought about this on the break. Is it possible that they may have had like an oil tank in the basement? I know this isn't 2019 when this fire happened, but were oil burning furnaces common then? And if that is the case, did they have a tank in the basement? Because I have 2 tanks in my basement.
Actually, they heated with coal.
They heated with
They
coal.
heated with coal and they had a lot of.
Okay,
They heated with coal and there was a lot of coal in the basement. That is something that I.
So
did
how
read.
hot does a coal fire burn? That would be another good question.
Hot enough to move a train.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. There are coal fires that have been going for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, that's right. So, and there was a lot of coal in the basement, they
A lot
say.
of coal, yeah.
Now, funny you say that. Isn't there a town in Pennsylvania that there's an underground mine it caught fire and it's a coal mine,
It's
I
still
believe,
going,
right?
yep.
Yeah, and it's
Still
still
going.
going 30, 40 years later.
So coal burns. and we've known that for a while. But it probably burns very hot,
And even if it doesn't, I would think that low and consistent.
low and slow.
Yeah, low and slow. I would think it'd still do a job.
Yeah. Shortly thereafter, I think it was 5 days after
Slow and steady wins the
had
race.
happened, the grief-stricken Sodders, Mrs. Sodder in particular, not being able to, move on, wanted her, George Sodder to bulldoze the property, and that was against the recommendations of the fire chief.
Right. They wanted him to leave the scene the same for obvious reasons, investigation, things like that, which kind of is funny to me because it didn't seem like they intended on doing any investigations with it. So
No, it sounded like it was a shut case.
pretty much, yeah.
So he bulldozed it over, and it was a few feet of dirt that he had moved over it, and with the intentions of putting a memorial together, probably planting some flowers and doing that kind of stuff.
Yep. And the next day, the local coroner convened an inquest, which basically is kind of like a jury,
Yep.
where they present the evidence of the fire, try to decide if it was arson, if it was just because of the faulty wiring or whatnot, and basically they come to a conclusion as a group, and that's kind of the verdict. But the inquest that the coroner had convened did come to the conclusion that it was an accident that was caused by the faulty wiring. So one of the weird things about that is one of the jurors who was on that was the same man who threatened George Sodder at his house, the insurance salesman we talked about before.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that guy comes back.
Yeah.
Talk about a small town.
Yeah.
Jennie's brother's on the fire department. This guy's serving on jury duty for this kind of event, which obviously he's kind of interesting. You know what I mean? So kind of somebody you would want to look at for this.
I would think so, yeah. But I mean, because of him, partly they kind of shut the case down.
Well, it's possible it's just a coincidence that he was on that jury too.
Yeah,
because it seems kind of suspicious just that he would be on it. But is it really when you have a small town?
Yeah, I would think that they probably have a set, maybe 5 people in the town that are the people that the coroner, convenes for these meetings. I don't think it's probably like a jury pool or anything like that. It's probably the same 5 people for just about all these cases.
So it's kind of interesting how it goes. And then time goes by. It kind of fast forwards over on to spring. There's some subsequent developments that happen. What ends up going on is that, like we said, they planted the flowers and all this, and the town's kind of moved on a little bit. But there's a bus driver that says that he passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve, and he said that he saw some people throwing balls of fire at the house.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, that almost seems like it would make sense as to why Jennie heard something maybe hit the roof.
It does. And a few months later, when the snow had melted, that kind of uncovers a lot of things.
Oh, you mean the fire didn't melt their entire yard of all the snow?
Yeah, well, there was probably more snow that came with it, but I bet you it burned pretty hot. They do find a dark, hard green rubber ball object.
Yeah, they say it could be like a pineapple bomb or some type of like a grenade type of device that is used in the war.
What the hell is a pineapple bomb? Is that like a type of
I think it's
grenade type
like a
thing?
napalm type.
Yeah.
Napalm bomb.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Okay.
So that's something that they find, but I don't know if they're really able to prove that is in fact what it is.
No, but I mean, at this point, this is just enough to kind of get the family to start asking questions because this whole thing was done hastily. I mean, they issued death certificates for the kids within 6 days, which isn't necessarily uncommon in a case like this, but there are plenty of cases where death certificates aren't issued for years. But the local newspaper actually said that all the bodies had been found, and that wasn't true at all. So, but with that bus driver's account, it kind of gets the family to start maybe thinking about what if the kids really didn't die in the fire.
And I think maybe the Sodders might have been thinking some of that kind of stuff prior to that to themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
it's very hard to admit, accept when something like that happens, and a lot of times people like to look to think that their family members are still alive, that somebody had abducted them or some kind of thing. And there's other things that go on that can kind of fuel the abduction type of mindset.
Right. And one of the big questions too is if this was faulty wiring that caused this. The Sodders actually report that their Christmas lights remained on for the majority of the fire.
That's true. I did read that. Like they recall being outside of the house and looking into the house,
and the Christmas lights were on.
And the lights are on.
Which you would think with the faulty wiring that would have shut off.
But
yeah, you would think.
Doesn't that almost contradict her statement of finding a fire by the fuse box? and then going to wake George initially.
Well, not necessarily, because a fire could have been set by the fuse box,
But wouldn't that
but not
have put out the
necessarily because
electricity?
of the well, I don't know.
Another thing that's kind of weird to me is that I know some people like to leave the lights on all night and stuff like that, but for me, when she woke up and closed the curtains and things like that, why wouldn't she have unplugged the Christmas lights?
That's true.
I mean, I always shut my tree and stuff off before bed. It was more for safety reasons than anything.
Yeah, that's a fire hazard,
Yeah.
especially if you get a real tree.
Right.
Oop. It's all good.
That's all right. Other witnesses claim that they've seen the children themselves. A woman kind of recalls seeing, as the house is burning, children in a car. I believe it was it outside the house, across the street? It was in that vicinity.
Yeah, like we said earlier, we couldn't really find a map, but it seems as though this is right on one of the state routes, a very busy road, kind of off the house. I would assume has a view of the house from what we've read.
That's kind of how I took it.
Yeah, but the woman said that she saw a car full of kids that were looking at the fire.
Right. And another woman at a rest stop in Fayetteville and Charleston, in that area.
Yep.
I don't know much. I believe that's two neighboring cities.
Close enough.
Close enough, like larger cities in the area. But
Right.
anyway, it's not that it matters. But she believes serving them breakfast. So this would have been a distance away from the fire.
Right.
The next morning. But what's weird about that is that she noted that they were coming in from a car that had Florida plates.
Right.
Did you guys see anything on that?
I did see something on that. I saw that they maybe went to a hotel. I think they said it was like around midnight, and the hotel clerk started saying something to the children. And when she did, the man who was with them turned around and started speaking quickly in Italian.
I did read something about that too.
And then the children basically just stopped talking, and they ended up checking out very early the next morning, like 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock, something like that.
So real quickly, this information and all these accounts make it back to the Sodders.
Right.
And I think a lot of that kind of fuels their thinking on our kids are still alive and they're somewhere out there.
Right.
Now, Morris had apparently confessed to a local minister who confirmed with George Sodder.
Right. And he was the fire chief.
Yes, the fire chief. Now, had you read anything about that?
Yeah, he told his local priest or whatever that he had buried a tin box with a heart.
With a heart that he. Now, here's my question, because I read two different things. This is why I was asking if you had heard anything about that. Some say that he had found the heart there, which is what he says.
Where else would you get a heart?
Right, but then there's other statements that it was somebody else that had brought the heart there, and it was something he had found himself.
Well, what I had heard is that he told his priest that he found a heart on the site and he buried it. And then when George confronted him about it, he actually showed George where it was buried, and they dug it up. And it actually turns out that it wasn't a heart; it was a beef liver.
And it wasn't even burned.
And it wasn't burnt. There was no fire access to that heart, to that beef liver at all. And he basically admitted that he just buried it there, hoping the Sodders would find it and have closure.
You think he was just sick of looking at it, sick
Right.
of hearing the story? Because it sounded, that community, it's done.
What would you think, Adam, if
It's fucking
this happened
weird.
to you and you were looking for closure and you found a fucking heart in a tin box?
Could you imagine in 2019, a family goes back to a house where they lost their children,
And there's a heart in a tin box.
a heart in a tin fucking box.
Yeah, that's a little fucked up.
And
This-
if you found it in the rubble, okay, I could see that. Oh, okay, we have some evidence here. But in a tin box, how did it get there?
Did this guy keep his job after this?
He did. I think so.
He did?
That was acceptable behavior in 1945. I'm just sick of looking to this shit.
From what
world's
I
a different
understand, though,
place.
there wasn't too many people to choose from in the fire department.
George Sodder did not wait for any of these reports to come through.
No.
He was constantly doing things, digging up information. Sometimes he would look in catalogs. He would look at different things, look at pictures of people. I was reading. He was obsessed with, I guess, being vigilant, hyper vigilant
Trying
everywhere.
to find his kids.
Yes, even in his community, because he for a while thought that they were still somewhere local.
And
Yeah.
not only that, but he went outside of his community. He actually found a girl in a magazine in New York City who looked like one of his missing daughters. And he drove all the way out, or went all the way out to New York City to try to track this girl down. And he wasn't allowed to see her, even though he insisted that I see this girl. This is my daughter.
Yep.
And it makes sense because as he couldn't find these kids locally, like anybody that's desperate, they're going to see their kids anywhere.
Right, and George, he actually personally followed up leads in person. There was a woman in St. Louis who claimed that Martha was being held in a convent. There was a bar patron in Texas that said that he overheard two people making incriminating statements about a fire that happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia a couple years before. None of them proved significant, and also the New York one, but that just proves that George was willing to go wherever it took to follow these leads on the children. So this is 1945. It's not like he just hopped in an airplane, took a 45-minute flight to wherever, and
this
out.
must have been very costly.
Very costly. And he was. I mean, he was a business owner and whatnot, but I can't imagine he was doing much business after this happened.
Must have been incredibly taxing on his business. Of
Absolutely.
course.
Probably just enough to pay the bills and then spending the rest of his time trying to look for his kids.
Right.
Time, money, and effort.
Yep. And he was probably driving days at a time to follow up these leads.
And gas money was not. Well, there was not enough. Let's put it that way.
Right.
He also tried to gain the interest of the FBI.
Yeah, he actually got a hold of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the FBI director at the time.
Mr. FBI.
Didn't he become president? No, it was Herbert Hoover. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, J. Edgar Hoover was.
He also invented the Hoover vacuum.
He was one of the first FBI directors, but he actually got a hold of him, and actually the same thing basically with the Moore Murray case we discussed. They basically told him, yeah, we'd love to help you. You got a lot of evidence, but we can't do anything unless the local police ask us.
This must be FBI protocol from the beginning.
It has to be, yeah.
Oh, I'm sure it is, because just like the Moore Murray case, they said, well, if the local department doesn't want us involved, we can't get involved. So get them to want us involved, and we'll gladly come help you.
Which doesn't make sense to me. I would think the FBI would have full reign and be like, you're doing a shitty job, so we're taking over.
Now, if others would have assumed it was a kidnapping, this could have been a multiple state event, and at that time
Absolutely.
the FBI could have jumped in.
And if the mafia was involved, like the Italian mafia, I mean, that's a criminal organization too. It's they didn't have RICO at the time, but still something the FBI would have been interested in.
Right, and because the local municipality had ruled it just a regular old house fire, incidental kind of thing, the FBI had no grounds to come in.
Nothing. Yep.
Now, in August of 1949, George was able to persuade Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new search through the dirt at the house site.
Right. As he was searching through the dirt, though, I don't believe they actually found too much other than They found a couple human vertebrae.
That's correct. And they were fused together, and that had given... I guess there's this, I don't know much about it, but there's something about the way your vertebrae fuse at a certain age that they were able to tell the age of the person that had the vertebrae.
Yeah,
right.
I have a little bit about this. So these bones were sent to Marshall T. Newman, who was a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution. They were confirmed to be lumbar vertebrae, and they were all from the same person. Quote from him: "Since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of the individual at the death should have been 16 or 17, according to his report. The top limit of age should be about 22. Since the centra, I'm assuming that's a couple of the bones, would normally fuse at 23, and they're still unfused. Given this age range, it was not very likely that these bones were from any of the 5 missing children, since the oldest, Maurice, who was 14 at the time, had made it out of the house, I'm assuming."
No, he was the oldest one that died.
Oldest one that died, yeah.
He was
I'm
far
sorry.
too young for how those bones typically would fuse. But
But this is 1945.
exactly, and the report also says that vertebrae of a boy his age sometimes are advanced enough to appear at the lower end of the range. So,
Okay.
but the pathologist actually also found some artifacts in the rubble, like a dictionary that had belonged to the children. They found some coins. The bone fragments, of course, and I think they also said there was like a toaster or something that still had its shape. So.
Yeah, it didn't even. It was still within. So I guess they're kind of leading to the idea that also saying it may not have been hot enough for all this to be
Right. I mean, if a toaster isn't going to burn, and even a dictionary especially, would you really think that human bones would be completely gone?
Kind of weird to just find a section of vertebrae too.
Okay, so how does a toaster not burn in the house fire, but my toaster just sets itself on fire? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, anyway.
At that point, the investigation actually attracted national attention. The West Virginia legislature actually held 2 hearings on the case in 1950, but Governor Oakley L. Patterson and the state police superintendent, W.E. Burchett, told the Sodders that the case was hopeless and closed it at the state level. The FBI decided it had jurisdiction as a possible interstate kidnapping, but they dropped the case after 2 years after just following leads that didn't pan out for him.
Right. I mean, after that, they probably just came to the same conclusion as everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, they unfortunately.
Now, with the end of officials' efforts to resolve the case, the Sodders did not give up hope. At this time, they kind of ramped up things on their own.
They realized they were on their own at that point, and they pretty much just stopped asking for outside help.
They had started printing up flyers with pictures of their children and offering a $5,000 reward, soon to be doubled.
It's a lot of money at that time.
That's a lot of money today, even still, you know, for any kind of information that would help to settle their case. Because, again, they don't believe it to be as such. Mm-hmm. In 1952, they even put up a billboard at the site of the house at that memorial.
Yeah, that stood for, I think, until like 1989.
Yeah, that was there for a while.
Yeah, and they put another one on U.S. Route 60 as well.
Yep.
And that would make a lot of sense because, you know, a lot of traffic and such kind of keeps people thinking about that. And we almost saw that with the Kimberly Moreau story where he was nailing flyers, all, you know, to telephone poles. So kind of a common practice.
And they were located nearby a couple of major U.S. routes.
Right. But, you know, even with all this, they kept ramping up their efforts, and they actually were getting more sightings of the children since they added these billboards and whatnot.
Was it the billboards, you think, or the reward attached to the billboards?
That
kind of
it
caused
was
people
probably
to...
both.
Yeah. But that's when the woman at the hotel saw them. It was the other woman at the restaurant saw them. And at this time, with all these leads and George following them, they're not really getting any further until they ended up getting a piece of mail.
Yeah, that was weird. And it just said something simple on it. It was a postcard, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a postcard. It said, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie.
They don't even have a kid named Frankie. That's the thing I kept like wrapping my brain around that.
I didn't even catch that, but you're right. Yeah.
Like there was no mention of a child named Frankie. And it said LLIL boys A90132 or 35. I mean, kind of a...
So I think that they hired a private detective, and I think that they found out that was Central City in Kentucky, I believe.
Yes, actually, I had heard that too.
Yeah.
Again, bringing them to another state and another lead that... But I don't really get where you would find this as a lead. Love brother Frankie? What is this shit?
Right, and the private investigator they hired to go to Central City and look into the report, it actually had a picture of him, which they said looked just like what Louis Sodder should have looked like at that time. So they really believe this was a true picture of Louis as an adult. So
felt like a solid lead.
Right, so they hired the private detective to go to Central City and look, and he actually never got back to the Sodders and never returned. So they weren't able to locate him. But that picture obviously gave them hope, and they added it to the billboard over time. But they left out Central City as to not, cause any harm to him if people did kidnap him and didn't want people knowing where he was.
Right. And I had read something along that effect as well. Now, George Sodder admitted to the Charleston Gazette-Mail, which is a newspaper, later the next year that the lack of information had been like hiking a rock wall.
Hitting a rock wall.
Hitting a rock wall. Hiking and hitting them hard,
Hitting the trails hard.
They can't go any further. So they were... I think what he meant was for every lead they were getting, they were quickly just being put right out.
Right. And the most promising one was the one where they sent the private investigator, and he didn't return.
How awful is that?
Right. And I wish I knew more about that private investigator. I looked into it. I was trying to figure out if he was, a very reputable one they hired, or if he was just somebody who'd be the type like, hey, thanks for the money, I'm gone.
Oh, I would imagine, and it's hard to say. I mean, I'm just speculating that their funds probably were not what they were before that fire.
Right.
So they probably got whoever they could get.
Yeah, and I'm, just like any case, people come out of the woodwork to try to scam you too. I mean, hey, I'm a private investigator. I'll go do whatever for you. $5,000.
I kind of got the feel that that's what he was.
Right. Yeah,
one of those kind of guys. Now, they didn't get much leads, like we said, and George ended up dying in 1969, not knowing in his heart what had happened to his family. Jennie and her surviving children, except John, who had never talked about the night of the fire, except to say that his family should just
move
give it
on.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, you should just accept it and get on with your life.
Drop my stuff.
They continued to seek answers to their questions about their missing kids. Jennie stayed in the family home, the new one that they had built, I'm assuming, or purchased, whatever it was, and put up fencing around it and added additional rooms. And she spent the rest of her life basically just wearing black and tending to the garden at the house.
And this actually is like a pretty common theme in like missing person cases, where a lot of families will stay in the same house. They'll never change their phone number, stuff like that. Just anything where if for some reason the missing person
will come back. They know where to go.
Exactly where to go. Yeah, it seems very common. I've heard that in a lot of different cases.
That would make sense. I mean, the last time you see them, if they want to come back, they would go right back there.
Right.
But they never did. And in 1989, Jennie Sodder had passed away.
Yeah. And at that time, that's when the family took the billboard down. Obviously, very old.
Yeah, that billboard was up for 30 years.
Yeah. Keeping it up for mom.
Yeah,
right.
but
keeping her going.
But the family didn't give up. The surviving Sodder children, who actually are joined by their own children, continued to publicize the case, investigate leads. Them and the older Fayetteville residents have theorized, actually, that the Sicilian mafia was trying to extort money from George Sodder, and the children may have been taken by someone who knew about the planned arson and said they would be safe if they left the house.
Okay,
what do you think about that?
No,
that's weird.
That's kind of weird to me because he had a big mouth. George Sodder did about Mussolini, and he had been talked to multiple times about, hey, you really should not be saying all these things.
Right.
So to me, I don't know. I feel like it would be more likely that if he was really that big and people knew about him in Italy and he was here running his mouth instead, I wonder if they sent someone over here. Sicily, isn't that part of Italy, though? Or is it like right outside of Italy?
No, it's in Italy, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that's kind of tied together.
Sicily's the soccer ball.
Yeah, and
But would it be for money or would it be for his big mouth?
That's the thing. I don't think the mob didn't need the money from him. I think if
Yeah.
anything, they were trying to teach him a lesson if
Right.
they were involved. But with that theory, they theorized that the children were possibly kidnapped and taken to Italy. And if they survived all those years and were aware their parents and siblings had survived too, they may have avoided contacting them to avoid getting harmed.
Well, I'll be honest. If
Yeah.
I'm going to be kidnapped, I want to go to Italy. Good pasta over there.
Yeah, well, not probably good in this case, but I'm going to say that probably
I'm just trying to look
isn't
at the
what
light
happened.
side of this.
No, I don't think that happened either. I mean, I think I don't want to say he's small potatoes or something to the mob, but at that point, with everything going on in Italy, I don't think they were too worried about what some little guy in West Virginia was saying.
I would hope not.
I mean,
No.
Italy was going crazy at that time after Mussolini died. They're going through government change, things like that.
Right.
Fresh after the war. I mean,
And it took them a number of years to recover,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm going to say no on that
Yeah, me too.
for sure. And we don't really have, other than that, there's really been nothing that's come of this. I mean, there's been a lot of articles written up. There's been, I believe, one of the Sodders is still alive. One of the
Sylvia, the 2-year-old that was
Yes.
in her mother's room at the time. Yeah, she's the only one still alive, and
As of 2015.
right.
Yeah.
She obviously probably isn't doing too much at her advanced age, but
she pretty much continued to search her entire life too.
Yep. And a lot of the newer investigations have obviously found a lot of flaws with how things were done back then. But I mean, we're all from an era where you pick up a phone call, call 911, the fire department's there in 5 minutes.
You don't even have to now. You can just pick up the phone and leave it and walk away. They can track you right to your house. And
Sure,
even on your cell phone, you call 911 and you leave it on the table, they'll find you.
Yep.
Now, do these these newer searches, well, not searches, but these investigations in this that had happened kind of more recent, they come to the same conclusion that we did, that these kids must have perished in this fire?
Yeah, most of them have said that the most likely scenario is that they perish in the fire, which is what I believe. But I will say that it's incredibly weird that a toaster and a dictionary would survive, but bones would be gone.
Is there a chance that somebody did abduct? Now, here's the thing. Is there a chance that this would be a number of people, somebody abducted the children, others moved the stuff around, you know what I mean?
Right.
Messed with his Jeep, his trucks, did all this. It would have taken a number of people.
Well, we didn't even talk about the neighbor. The neighbor actually basically admitted that he stole the block and tackle from George Sodder that night.
That's true.
Right.
And actually also admitted that he is the one who threw the ladder down the embankment because he had used it to cut the phone line, thinking that it was the power line. Which doesn't make sense to me. Why are you cutting a power line?
Yeah, why would the neighbor be cutting a power line unless he saw the fire and was just trying to prevent it from getting worse? But even still, if you're going to go cut a power line, you realize you're going to get electrocuted, right?
And Jennie Sodder had said that if that power line was cut, they all would have died. I don't know if that's due to the fire alarms or whatnot, but she said they all would have died if that was the case. But
That's
he did
interesting.
end up, he admitted that he climbed the 14 feet and then reached over 2 feet to cut the phone line using the ladder and also threw it down the hill while he was stealing the block and tackle. But the guy did say that he had nothing to do with the fire or the disappearance.
Well, of course he didn't, because now he's on the hook if he said he's already incriminating himself.
Right.
Yeah, I used your ladder to cut your phone line while your house is on fire.
Now, when did he come out with this information?
I'm not sure when he did. I think it was pretty soon after the fire. But, I mean, we all came to the conclusion that the trucks were probably flooded. But
it's kind of interesting that he would come out with that information, but still the municipality would rule it as a fire that was probably caused at the
he claimed he had nothing
box.
to do with it.
Well, of course. I mean, how many
Exactly.
times have we seen something like that where
Nowadays, that would never fly. That's for sure.
Right.
And but would it really be without out of the realm of possibility that he maybe tampered with the trucks as well?
Well,
if he did have something to do with this fire,
Absolutely not.
Well, how would you explain the sound on the roof?
a little pineapple bomb.
Yeah, well, either that or that little ball thing that Jennie had found after the snow had thawed and whatever.
And somebody did claim to see something.
I mean, we don't know there's a relationship with these neighbors, but who's to say the neighbor wasn't trying to steal the block and tackle, cut the phone lines or the power line, whatever, and kill the family?
But that's kind of
Over a block and tackle.
Would make
Really?
Well, unless his intentions are just to kill the family and get what he can out of it.
Yeah, I mean, some
I
people
guess,
don't think
but-
about their crimes. They think, I don't want to get caught for stealing, so I'll kill somebody. Like that.
Well, I
It's
mean,
completely
yeah, I guess,
irrational
but
thought
what
to us, but
just what a low bar to set for yourself. That's
Well,
all.
And what's crazy is that there is very little mention of the neighbor.
There is,
other
yeah.
than just that, just a quick little blurb of.
But
this
just
is what he
having
said.
those three things involved at the same time definitely doesn't leave out the possibility that he was involved some way.
He had to have been.
Yeah.
Would
And
be my guess.
we had discussed that phone call too. I mean, if something sinister happened, maybe that phone call with the woman with the wrong number wasn't really a wrong number. Maybe it was somebody calling to see if so and so was awake or at the residence or whatnot.
Yeah. No. So it could be. There's a number of things here.
There's definitely a lot of room for speculation, but I think we all came to the conclusion that we all believe that the children probably died in the fire.
Oh, for sure. I would say the children died in the fire, but I can't wrap my mind around how the fire started.
Well, not only that, but I'm in agreement. I believe they passed in the fire, but where are the bones? That's what I don't understand, because bones, it wouldn't take 45 minutes to burn an entire body and bones unless there was some sort of accelerant that got that fire real hot.
You'd also have to
coal in
dig
the
it.
basement.
With how quickly George bulldozed over the scene, you would have to dig up everything around there because those bones could be spread out and everything.
He definitely rushed filling that in, and I can understand, I guess, being so distraught. You don't want to look at the fire. You don't want to look at the hole anymore that was your life, and you're just like, I just want to move on. You fill it in and build a house and just be done. But you need to let the investigation go, too. If you really want to know what's going to happen, you can't just rush into, I guess, cleaning it up and moving on.
Right. And it's hard, too, because it didn't really seem like there was going to be much more investigation, but they did tell him not to touch it. So
Right.
it's kind of one of those things. I mean, like you said, he doesn't want to look at it. He wants to take care of it, but they may have done something.
It's just a strange thing. I'm going to say that it was probably arson.
See, I definitely believe there was a crime here, and I don't think the crime was kidnapping. I agree. I think that we're investigating who was the arsonist here, and
Yeah.
for me, it leads back to the neighbor.
Most likely the neighbor. Funny thing is, nobody's ever pointed the finger to it as being arson.
Nope.
At least not originally.
Other than the pineapple bombs, that's the only evidence. And
Right.
like you said, what's going to hit your roof at 1 a.m? A meteor?
A
That's about
pineapple
it.
bomb.
You're right.
Yeah,
Like-
well, apparently.
Like it's not too much at that point, but
So you're going with me on this as most likely arson, probably the neighbor.
he's at the crime scene regardless, so it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's
He took the
there.
block and tackle. He admitted he was at the crime scene, so
And
Right.
usually when crimes happen, it's by somebody you know.
Yep.
I mean, that's just a statistical fact. What are you going with, Jake?
Okay, now just a quick question before I go with my conclusion, I guess. If he admits that he's at the crime scene, is it possible that he accidentally started a fire trying to cut this phone line? Is it possible?
yeah, I guess so. But I still don't see why he was cutting the phone line. For me,
Yeah, absolutely. What are you doing cutting someone's phone line at 1 a.m. unless
Why-
you're trying to hurt them?
Why are you moving
Period.
the ladder?
Right. Why are you throwing the ladder 75 feet away?
and how did
Down
she
a-
not
over
hear
a
the
cliff?
ladder? Would you hear if a ladder was being thrown right outside your house?
Now, I wonder if that noise she thought
good
was something hitting the roof was the ladder being thrown over the
very well
cliff,
could possibly
Or the
be that.
ladder being maybe... That's a damn good
put
point.
up against the house.
Or sliding off to the side a little bit.
Right. Is it possible the ladder fell?
So that would say that there's no pineapple bomb.
That's definitely possible.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't even think of that.
Yep. So,
Yeah.
But I will say that if it was an arson and he was involved, the motive could be very simple. He's stealing the block and tackle, and they ain't worried a damn thing about the block and tackle if their house just burned down with their kids in it.
Yeah, right.
Just
It
seems
might
like
be something that gets completely overlooked. He might have intended nobody to get hurt, but
Well, it
Again,
seems
it
like
just
you're
seems like
totally
overkill.
right. You're totally escalating your crime from
Right.
theft to a murder of a giant fucking family potentially.
Yeah, right. Like to me, that's just like, okay, I want a monster and I want a beef jerky stick from Heathco's. I'm gonna go steal it from Heathco's, and in the process of it, I'm gonna come in and shoot 3 people.
Yeah.
It just seems like that if that was the case, they'd be escalating that situation way further than it has to
but
go.
you've seen it with several crimes.
It's
there.
true.
Oh, for sure.
They just the
if-
minute they commit their first crime, they lose all track. Oh, I got to kill people so I don't get caught.
Well, here's the thing.
That's not gonna help you at all.
Well,
Right.
maybe this guy wanted to steal the block and tackle, and also wanted to fucking kill them too.
That's definitely
I mean, that's
possible.
probably it. Stranger things have happened. We
maybe.
talked about head fuckers last episode. So
Yeah,
I
maybe
would
George
be
Sodder
interest-
was a dick.
I would be interested to know if the neighbor was one of the Italian immigrants as well.
yeah, there's so little on it. It's
There
just
is,
that
yeah.
little blurb.
Yep.
Yeah, this is what he says.
Yep.
So you're in agreement with us, man, that this was an arson most likely, but the kids.
I think the kids. I'm up in the air about it. I want like 90% of me says yeah, they probably just perished in the fire. But to me, I'd like to know if there was some sort of accelerant that would burn bones quicker than
The bones are
what it
definitely hard
would've.
to get past. Definitely.
Right. It's interesting that they found vertebrae in the remains. It's possible that the oldest who did or supposedly perish in the fire, maybe he wasn't fully, or I guess developed enough to have those fused vertebrae and whatever. I don't know.
And it would also
It's
make sense to
interesting.
me that if they did find any small amount of bones, that it would be from the oldest person.
And you know what else
Right.
I'm remembering? I did read something that there was a cemetery in that town that was vandalized fairly recently too.
I heard about that
did
as
read
well, yeah.
something of that's coming back to me now. And there is a potential that there could have been a vertebrae from there.
I actually did hear that as well. And I think they actually said that the bones might have been proven to have came from the cemetery.
Because, and another
Okay.
thing that we
There
didn't
was
mention,
no fire.
there was
to
no
those
burn
vertebrae.
marks on those
No burn
bones,
marks,
nothing
yeah.
Really?
associating them with
Are you
fire.
accusing the Sodder children of vandalizing a
If
cemetery?
anything, this is a police cover-up.
Wouldn't surprise me if it was fucking Morris, the one that brought the beef liver heart thing.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and left some
that's some
vertebrae
dumb
there.
shit.
Did he start the fire? Did he do? I mean, you could take it anywhere.
He
He
certainly
didn't
didn't
start
seem to
the
care
fire.
about the fire.
Yeah, he was real slow to respond.
He could have been covering for somebody. I mean,
Yeah, law enforcement, we love them, but
Or he could have just been too drunk to drive the big friggin' fire thing.
which is probably
Fire
the
engine.
case. But yeah, I'm gonna. I guess we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion here.
Yeah, probably arson.
Most likely arson, and the kids burned in the fire somehow. And
God, this has been such an uplifting
between
story.
the bulldozing and all the other shit that had happened, they just got buried and left there.
Yep.
Somehow they're there. They're there. They just weren't found. I mean, how often did they look for a missing person and they don't find this person? They do multiple searches and then they come back and they find the fucking body
within a fucking mile.
right close to where they did the
Yep,
search.
yep.
So there's a good chance that they're still there,
Yep.
right at
Right.
the side of the fire. And I'm thinking that that's where they are.
Yep.
So you guys got anything else to add to this?
No, I don't think so.
I just want to add, thank you for all the positive feedback we've gotten this week. I know I personally have gotten message more than once about our stories and about the podcast in general. We just want to thank those who have been listening and who continue to spread the word and give us shout outs. And we really, really, really do appreciate it. We do this not only for us, but for you guys too. We like putting this content out. It's interesting to us. It's a great stress relief after working all week and getting to come out here on a Friday night and record and hang out and have a couple beers and talk about an interesting case that we've been studying all week. So thank you very much to you guys who are listening.
Yeah, you got our social media up there?
Yep, we're on Facebook, Stories from the Shed, Instagram, Stories from the Shed Podcast, YouTube as well, Stories from the Shed Podcast. Twitter is at Stories from Shed, and we have iMessage and Gmail, sftspodcast at gmail.com. Send us story suggestions, send us reviews, like and subscribe on YouTube. What's the iTunes one? Send us a 5-star review. I don't know. I have an iPhone and I don't know how that shit works.
All that good shit. And I wanted to give a big thank you to Jason for coming back out again tonight with us.
I'll be out again. This is fun.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you guys for listening.
All right, have a good night, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.